So, as you're looking at Hesiod's theogony, there are a couple of things that I like to point out that the book doesn't really talk about, but I think it will help with understanding what's sort of behind the theogony. This isn't something that would be conscious necessarily with Hesiod. He, of course, is inheriting a lot of stories and putting them together, and I think he doesn't always have a clear sense of stuff. So one of the things that I want to talk about is, and the only thing I'll talk about in this particular segment, is the castration of Uranus, or sky, by Cronus, which leads to his overthrow and Cronus's rise. Now, partly that story fits in with the dynastic struggles that not only the Greeks but other Mediterranean peoples had in their creation sagas. So in the Middle East, there are also stories where one generation of gods overthrows an earlier generation. And in fact, you even have the cycle of three, where the first overthrows, the second overthrows the first, and the third overthrows the second, and then the third is the gods that everyone at the time of the author are worshiping. So there's some of that, but there's also this matter of what's going on in the castration. So there is an Egyptian account which involves the figure of Nut, who is the sky goddess, and her husband Geb, who is the earth god. So the genders are reversed here, but the deal is that sky and earth are seen as basically solids. And if you imagine that sky and earth are basically locked in coitus, they're sort of stuck together. That's sort of the situation that the Egyptian account has. And in that account, Geb, the earth god, is castrated. That allows then Nut, the sky goddess, to basically zoom up and form a dome or an arc. And now people can actually get out of Nut, come out of the sky, and populate the earth. So in the Greek account, the equivalent of that would have been something like this. So you've got sky on top of earth, so Uranus on top of Gaia, and they're stuck in this coital situation, but you've got a flat plane on top of a flat plane. And then after the castration of Uranus, sky pops up into a dome, which is the way Hesiod would have seen the world, and then the flat plane of earth now has room where people can move around. They can't move around in this situation because there's no room, but now they can move around. So the reason that I think that's important is I think the older account has the castration as a practical matter. There is no room for life to exist. How can we get to that point? We have to separate earth and sky to allow for there to be room on earth under sky, which is seen as a solid dome, to move about and live. And so it's just a practical matter. So in the Egyptian account, there's no animus, there's no sort of anger behind it. It's just, this is what has to happen because the new generation of gods and people have to exist. They can't if there's no room. And I think that's sort of behind the Hesiod account, but Hesiod's understanding of it is sort of slippery. So and I'll point to one thing in the text that really sort of indicates this slipperiness. There's one point where sky and earth, right? Sky is described as being over earth and basically covering earth entirely. Well, that makes sense if you think of earth as a disk and sky also as sort of a disk on top of it, right? So they fit one right on top of the other. But in the account, when Gaia's plotting with her kids, right? And of course, they're stuck inside her. The original version, probably they're stuck inside there because there's no room for them to come out. But in Hesiod's account, that's shifted to Uranus forces them back in so they can't come out. And that's a little bit different, right? So we get this sort of, there's more intentionality on the part of Uranus in his actions. It's not just that there isn't any room, it's that he's not letting there be any room. But after she's plotted with them, Hesiod then says that night came on, and sky came to Gaia. Well, sky or Uranus can't come to Gaia if sky is exactly the same as the sky, because the sky doesn't go anywhere, right? It doesn't disappear and then come back, right? There'd be no atmosphere. So sky and earth as entities that are on top of each other, not allowing things, gets a little bit wobbly with Hesiod, because there's also Gaia and Uranus who are somewhat separate from the entity. So Gaia is the earth, but she's also the spirit behind the earth, and Uranus is the sky, but he's also the spirit sort of inhabiting the sky, which means he can be elsewhere and he can show up. So the story sort of requires that for it to work. And Hesiod's also got this whole dynastic battle thing going on, which is something he and his predecessors may have inherited from the Middle Eastern accounts that have this dynastic struggle. But the reason I want to point that out is that in the Hesiodic account, and how much of it is actually Hesiod and how much of it is his tradition that he is just presenting, that I don't think we can figure out. But there is some stuff that's added that's made different. We do have more intentionality on the part of Sky. He is clearly a more tyrannical figure. He is clearly more a figure wanting to hold on to power. Of course, he's unable to do that, which indicates that he doesn't deserve the power because he can't hold on to the power. And the same thing with Cronus. Cronus can't hold on to the power, so he doesn't really deserve it. But Zeus, when he gets the power, shows that he can handle it and that he can make alliances, and so he deserves it. So there is that, but there's also this whole sort of look at the words in the text dealing with the castration. You get a lot of words indicating anger and emotionality in the text. Even the way with the castration is described, the sickle is described in great detail as having these really jagged teeth and so forth, almost as if we're getting a close-up of the weapon, which again tends to intensify that scene. So there's a lot sort of going on here poetically beyond the sort of myth that's behind it. So I did want to share that with you, and I've got another thing that I'm going to share with you, but I'll do that in a separate little video snippet.